The gunshots rang out across the dusty street as Genevieve Owens pressed her trembling body against the whitewashed church wall, her wedding dress now stained with dirt and tears. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but the sudden raid by the Blackwater gang had turned her wedding into a scene of terror and bloodshed. Genevieve peered around the corner of the church, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The wedding guests had scattered, and her groom, William, had disappeared in the chaos. The gang members were still firing shots into the air, ransacking the town of Pine Creek, Colorado. It was 1876, and lawlessness still reigned in many parts of the frontier, but she never imagined her wedding day would end like this. A loud explosion from the direction of the town bank sent another wave of panic through her. She needed to run to escape, but where could she go? Her family's ranch was 10 miles away, and in her wedding dress and delicate shoes, she wouldn't make it far on foot. "Miss, get down!" A deep voice called from somewhere behind her. Genevieve whirled around to see a tall, broad-shouldered man on horseback, his face partially obscured by a bandana pulled up to his eyes. For a moment, she feared he was one of the gang members, but there was something in those intense blue eyes that told her otherwise. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible over the continuing gunfire. The man pulled down his bandana, revealing a ruggedly handsome face with a strong jawline dusted with stubble. "The name's Fletcher Irwin, miss. I'm passing through, but it seems I picked a bad day to visit Pine Creek." He extended a gloved hand toward her. "We need to get you out of here. Those men are Blackwater boys, and they don't leave witnesses." Genevieve hesitated. She'd never seen this man before in her life, and her mama had always warned her about strangers. But another explosion closer this time made the decision for her. "My groom," she said, her voice breaking. "William, I can't find him." Fletcher's eyes scanned the chaos beyond. "I'm sorry, miss, but we don't have time. Those men will be headed this way soon. You need to come with me now if you want to live." Genevieve cast one last desperate look around the church grounds. Bodies lay scattered, some moving, some still. Her heart ached with worry for William, for her parents, for everyone she loved, but Fletcher was right. She couldn't help anyone if she was dead. With shaking hands, she gathered up her tattered skirts and reached for Fletcher's outstretched hand. His grip was strong as he pulled her up, but just as she was about to swing her leg over the horse, she realized the impossibility of mounting while wearing her voluminous wedding dress. "I can't," she began, panic rising in her throat. Fletcher's eyes softened with understanding. "Hold on," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. He stood before her for a moment, his tall frame towering over her, then he bent slightly at the knees. "May I, miss?" Genevieve nodded, and in one swift movement he lifted her onto the horse, arranging her wedding dress as best he could before mounting behind her. "Hold tight," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear as he reached around her for the reins. His strong arms encircled her, making her feel strangely safe despite the danger all around them. The horse bolted forward at Fletcher's command, and Genevieve clung to the saddle horn, her veil flying behind them as they galloped away from the only home she'd ever known. She couldn't stop the tears that flowed freely down her face, tears for William, for her family, for the life she was leaving behind. As they rode away from Pine Creek, the sounds of gunfire faded, replaced by the rhythmic pounding of hooves against the hard-packed earth. Genevieve's mind raced with questions about this mysterious man who had just saved her life. But for now, all she could do was hold on and pray that somehow everything would be all right. They rode in silence for what seemed like hours, the landscape changing from the familiar surroundings of Pine Creek to wild, untamed territory. Fletcher guided his horse with confidence, taking paths that seemed invisible to Genevieve's untrained eye. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the plains. "We'll stop soon," Fletcher finally said, breaking the silence. "There's a creek about a mile ahead. We can rest there for the night." Genevieve nodded mutely, her body aching from the long ride and the emotional toll of the day. When they reached the creek, Fletcher dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and Fletcher caught her before she fell. "Easy there," he said, his voice gentler than she expected from a man of his rugged appearance. "You've been through a lot today." "Thank you," she whispered, finding her voice at last. "You saved my life back there." Fletcher nodded, a shadow passing over his features. "I've seen what the Blackwater gang can do. No one deserves that fate, especially not a bride on her wedding day." As he set about making a small camp, Genevieve sank down onto a fallen log, the reality of her situation finally hitting her full force. She was miles from home with a stranger, her wedding ruined, and she had no idea if William or her family had survived the attack. "Here," Fletcher said, offering her a canteen of water. "Drink this. You need to keep your strength up." She accepted the canteen gratefully, taking small sips as she watched him efficiently gather wood for a fire. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved with purpose and confidence. "Who are you really?" she asked when he returned to the fire he'd built. "Why were you in Pine Creek today?" Fletcher sat across from her, the flames casting dancing shadows on his face. "Like I said, I was just passing through. I've been tracking the Blackwater gang for some time now, following their trail of destruction." He paused, his jaw tightening. "They took something from me a long time ago, something I can never get back." Genevieve sensed there was more to his story, but she didn't press. They both had their secrets, their sorrows. "Where will you take me?" she asked instead. "There's a town about 2 days' ride from here, Silverton. It's small, but they have a sheriff who's honest and a telegraph office. You can send word to your family from there." Genevieve nodded, twisting the simple gold band on her finger, her engagement ring from William. "And then what?" Fletcher's eyes met hers across the fire. "That's up to you, Miss Owens. Once you're safe in Silverton, you're free to go wherever you please." "Genevieve," she said softly. "My name is Genevieve." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Genevieve," he repeated, the name sounding somehow different when spoken in his deep voice. That night, as Genevieve lay wrapped in Fletcher's spare blanket, staring up at the stars, she wondered about the twists of fate that had brought her here. This morning, she had been preparing to become Mrs. William Thompson, looking forward to a life of predictability and comfort. Now, she was sleeping under the open sky with a mysterious stranger who tracked outlaws and rode like he was born in the saddle. She turned her head slightly to look at Fletcher, who sat with his back against a tree, his hat pulled low over his eyes but clearly still alert. There was something about him that both frightened and fascinated her, a wildness, yes, but also a code of honor that had made him risk his life to save hers. Genevieve closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was a guilty one. Despite all the horror of the day, there was a small, traitorous part of her that felt more alive than she ever had before. Dawn broke crisp and clear, the first light of day filtering through the trees surrounding their makeshift camp. Genevieve awoke to the smell of coffee brewing over a small fire. She sat up, disoriented for a moment before the memories of the previous day came flooding back. "Morning," Fletcher said, handing her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "Hope you slept well enough." Genevieve accepted the cup gratefully, taking a sip of the strong, bitter liquid. "Better than I expected to," she admitted. She looked down at her once beautiful wedding dress, now dirty and torn in places. "I'm afraid I'm not dressed for riding." Fletcher rummaged in his saddlebags and pulled out a bundle of clothing. "These might help. They'll be too big, but better than trying to ride in that dress all day." Genevieve took the offered clothes: a simple button-up shirt, a pair of trousers, and a worn leather belt. "Thank you," she said, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks at the thought of wearing men's clothing. But he was right. It would be impossible to travel comfortably in her wedding dress. Fletcher nodded toward a cluster of bushes near the creek. "You can change over there. I'll keep watch to make sure you have privacy." Genevieve retreated behind the bushes, struggling with the tiny buttons of her wedding dress. After several frustrated attempts, she finally managed to wriggle out of it, carefully folding the once pristine white gown. She pulled on Fletcher's clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs to make them somewhat fit her smaller frame. The belt cinched the pants at her waist, and she used a strip torn from her petticoat to tie back her long auburn hair. When she emerged from behind the bushes, Fletcher was saddling his horse, his back to her. He turned at the sound of her approach, and for a moment he simply stared at her, an unreadable expression on his face. "Does it look that bad?" Genevieve asked, suddenly self-conscious. Fletcher cleared his throat. "Not at all. Just different from the bride I rescued yesterday." He offered her a canteen. "We should get moving. I want to cover as much ground as possible before nightfall." As they rode, Genevieve found herself becoming more comfortable with Fletcher's presence behind her. His body was solid and warm against her back, and his arms around her as he held the reins provided a strange sense of security. They spoke little, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Around midday, they stopped by a small stream to rest the horse and eat some of the jerky and hardtack Fletcher carried in his saddlebags. Genevieve sat on a sun-warmed rock, watching as Fletcher checked his horse's hooves and patted the animal's neck affectionately. "What's his name?" she asked, nodding toward the horse. "Redemption," Fletcher replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Seemed fitting at the time I got him." "And when was that?" Fletcher's eyes grew distant. 5 years ago, after the Blackwater gang raided my hometown of Cottonwood Springs. I was away, working as a ranch hand up north. By the time I got back, everything was gone. My family, our ranch, everything." He stroked Redemption's mane. "This horse was all I could salvage from the ashes." Genevieve's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Fletcher." He shrugged, but she could see the pain in his eyes. "That's why I've been tracking them. Not for revenge exactly, for justice." "Is that why you were in Pine Creek? You knew they were coming," Fletcher nodded. "I've been following their trail for months. They have a pattern: small towns, usually on days when there's a reason for people to gather. Makes it easier for them to control the situation." He looked at her. "Your wedding day was just an unfortunate coincidence." Genevieve wrapped her arms around herself, thinking of all the careful planning that had gone into her wedding. The flowers, the music, the cake that her mother had spent days preparing. All destroyed in a matter of minutes. "William and I were going to move to Denver," she said softly. "He had a job offer at a law firm there. We were supposed to leave right after the wedding." "This William," Fletcher said, his voice carefully neutral. "You love him very much." Genevieve hesitated. The truth was, she had agreed to marry William because it was expected of her. He was the son of her father's business partner, well-educated and financially secure. He would provide a good, stable life for her. But love, that had been a more complicated question. "He's a good man," she said finally. "Kind, responsible, the sort of man any woman would be fortunate to marry." Fletcher studied her for a moment, as if trying to read between the lines of what she'd said. Then he nodded and stood up. "We should keep moving." They rode on through the afternoon, the terrain becoming more rugged as they headed toward Silverton. Genevieve found herself telling Fletcher about her life in Pine Creek, her father's general store, her mother's famous apple pies, the schoolhouse where she had taught the town's children for the past 2 years. "You're a teacher?" Fletcher asked, genuine interest in his voice. "Yes," she replied. "It's not what my parents wanted for me. They'd have preferred I focus on finding a husband, but I love it. There's something wonderful about watching a child's face light up when they finally understand something they've been struggling with." "I can imagine," Fletcher said. "My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She taught my brothers and me at home, said we were too wild to inflict on any respectable schoolmarm." Genevieve laughed, the sound surprising even herself. It felt strange to laugh after everything that had happened, but also necessary, like a release valve for the pressure of grief and fear that had been building inside her. As the day wore on, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. Fletcher frowned up at the sky. "Storm's coming. We need to find shelter." They pushed on, the wind picking up and carrying with it the scent of rain. Just as the first heavy drops began to fall, Fletcher spotted an abandoned cabin nestled in a stand of pine trees. "There," he said, pointing. "We can wait out the storm there." They reached the cabin just as the skies opened up, rain pouring down in sheets. Fletcher helped Genevieve dismount, then led Redemption to a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. The door to the cabin itself was hanging off its hinges, and inside, dust and debris covered the floor. But it was dry and the roof appeared sound. "It's not much," Fletcher said, looking around the small one-room structure, "but it'll keep us dry for the night." Genevieve nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept her going since the attack was wearing off, leaving her body aching and her mind foggy with fatigue. She sank down onto a rough wooden bench against the wall, trying to ignore the growing discomfort of her damp clothes. Fletcher busied himself with building a fire in the small stone fireplace, working quickly and efficiently. Soon, a warm glow filled the cabin, and the crackling of the flames provided a counterpoint to the steady drumming of rain on the roof. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Fletcher said, not looking at her as he unpacked provisions from his saddlebags. "Hang them by the fire to dry. I'll step outside while you change." Genevieve clutched her arms around herself. "I have nothing else to wear." Fletcher reached into his bag and pulled out a worn but clean-looking flannel shirt. "This will be long enough to cover you decently. I'll keep my back turned until your clothes dry." He handed her the shirt, then turned and walked to the door, stepping outside into the rain to give her privacy. Genevieve changed quickly, removing the sodden clothes and pulling on Fletcher's flannel shirt, which fell to her knees. She hung her wet garments on a chair near the fire, then called out, "You can come back in now." Fletcher returned, water dripping from his hat and coat. He removed both, hanging them beside her clothes, then added more wood to the fire. His own shirt was damp, clinging to the broad expanse of his shoulders and chest. Genevieve found herself watching the play of muscles beneath the fabric as he moved and quickly looked away when he turned toward her. "Are you hungry?" he asked, pulling out a small packet wrapped in oilcloth. "It's not much, just jerky and some hardtack, but it'll keep your strength up." Genevieve nodded, realizing she was indeed famished. They ate in companionable silence, the fire warming the small cabin as the storm raged outside. After they had finished their meager meal, Fletcher leaned back against the wall, stretching his long legs out before him. "Tell me more about this William of yours," he said suddenly. Genevieve looked up, surprised by the question. "What do you want to know? How did you meet? How did he propose? Was it a whirlwind romance or a long courtship?" Genevieve smiled slightly, remembering. "There was nothing whirlwind about it. Our families have been friends for years." His father owns the bank in Pine Creek, and they often came to dinner at our home. When I turned 18, William began calling on me officially. He's 26, established in his career, ready to start a family. She twisted her engagement ring around her finger. After a year of courtship, he proposed. It was all very proper. He asked my father's permission first, then took me for a walk in the town square and got down on one knee. "Sounds like something from a storybook," Fletcher commented, but there was something in his tone that made Genevieve look at him more closely. "It was perfectly respectable," she said defensively. "William is a good man." "I'm sure he is," Fletcher replied. "And I hope, for your sake, that he survived the raid. But I have to ask, Genevieve, did you love him? Or was he just the respectable choice?" Genevieve felt heat rising in her cheeks, partly from indignation and partly because his question hit too close to a truth she had been avoiding. "That's a very personal question, Mr. Irwin." Fletcher's blue eyes held hers steadily. "We're alone in an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere, with a storm raging outside and outlaws possibly on our trail. I think we're past formalities, don't you?" Genevieve looked away into the dancing flames of the fire. "I cared for William deeply," she said finally. "He would have provided a good life for me, a safe life, and in time I believe real love would have grown between us." "But it wasn't there yet," Fletcher said softly. Genevieve shook her head slightly. "No," she admitted, "it wasn't there yet, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't have come. Not all marriages begin with passion, Fletcher. Some start with respect and friendship and grow into something stronger over time." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then said, "My parents had that kind of passion. From the day they met until the day they died, they couldn't keep their eyes or their hands off each other." A faint smile touched his lips. "It used to embarrass me and my brother something fierce, the way they'd steal kisses when they thought we weren't looking." "That sounds wonderful," Genevieve said, a wistful note in her voice. "My parents' marriage was more practical. They're partners, companions. I've never seen them exchange more than a peck on the cheek. And that's what you were headed for with William, a practical partnership. There are worse things," Genevieve said defensively. "Yes," Fletcher agreed, his eyes darkening with some memory. "There are much worse things. But there are better things too, Genevieve. There's the kind of love that makes your heart race when you hear their footsteps, that makes you feel more alive just being near them. The kind that makes you brave and foolish and completely, gloriously happy." Genevieve felt something stir within her at his words, a longing for exactly the kind of love he described. "Have you ever felt that way?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Fletcher's gaze held hers for a long moment before he looked away. "Once," he said. "A long time ago." He stood up abruptly. "We should try to get some rest. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." Genevieve watched as he spread his bedroll on the floor near the fire, then laid down a second blanket a respectable distance away for her. The conversation was clearly over, but his words lingered in her mind as she settled onto her makeshift bed, the sound of rain and crackling fire lulling her toward sleep. Just before she drifted off, she found herself wondering what it would be like to be loved the way Fletcher had described, with passion and fire, rather than the cool respect William had always shown her. And more dangerously, she found herself wondering what it would be like to be loved that way by Fletcher himself. The storm passed during the night, and morning dawned clear and bright. Genevieve awoke to find Fletcher already up, tending to redemption outside the cabin. Her clothes had dried overnight, and she quickly changed back into them before joining Fletcher outside. The landscape looked washed clean after the storm, the colors more vibrant, the air fresher. Genevieve took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of pine and wet earth. "Did you sleep well?" Fletcher asked, glancing up from where he was checking Redemption's saddle. Yes, thank you, she replied, smoothing down her borrowed shirt. How much farther to Silverton? If we push hard, we can be there by nightfall, he said. But first, we need to stop at a place I know. Get you some proper clothes. You can't ride into town dressed like that. Genevieve looked down at her makeshift outfit and nodded. The trousers and shirt were practical for riding, but hardly appropriate for a young woman in civilized company. Where are we stopping? An old friend's ranch. It's about 3 hours from here. Harriet and Daniel Turner. They'll help us. They set out shortly after breakfast, the day warming as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Fletcher seemed more relaxed than he had been the previous day, pointing out landmarks and telling Genevieve stories about his travels. She found herself laughing more than once at his descriptions of the characters he'd encountered on the frontier. So there I was, he was saying, standing in the middle of this saloon in Dodge City, facing down this enormous fellow they called Bear Johnson, all because I'd accidentally taken his seat at the poker table. What did you do? Genevieve asked, enthralled by his tale. Well, I looked him straight in the eye and said, Sir, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Please, allow me to buy you a drink to make amends. And you know what? He started laughing, a great booming laugh that shook the whole building. Said I was the first man who'd ever apologized to him instead of drawing on him. We ended up spending the whole night drinking and playing cards together. He's still a friend to this day. Genevieve smiled, imagining the scene. There was something about Fletcher that drew people to him, a natural charm combined with an integrity that was rare in these wild territories. You've had quite a life, she commented. Much more exciting than mine in Pine Creek. Fletcher's arms tightened slightly around her as he guided redemption around a fallen tree. Exciting isn't always better, Genevieve. There's something to be said for stability, for knowing where you belong. His words reminded her of her uncertain future, and her smile faded. I don't know where I belong anymore, she said softly. If William is dead, if my parents didn't survive, I have no home to go back to. Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then said, You're stronger than you think, Genevieve. Whatever has happened, whatever you find out when we reach Silverton, you'll find a way forward. I believe that. His confidence in her was touching, and Genevieve found herself leaning back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. They rode in companionable silence for a while, until Fletcher pointed to a plume of smoke rising in the distance. That's the Turner Ranch, he said. We're almost there. The ranch was larger than Genevieve had expected, with a well-built main house and several outbuildings spread across a broad valley. A corral held several horses, and cattle grazed on the surrounding hillsides. As they approached, a tall, gray-haired man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. Is that you, Fletcher Irwin? He called. Been a long time, son. Fletcher dismounted, helping Genevieve down before striding forward to clasp the older man's hand. Too long, Daniel. It's good to see you. Daniel Turner's eyes moved to Genevieve, curiosity evident in his weathered face. And who might this young lady be? This is Miss Genevieve Owens, Fletcher said. We're in a bit of trouble, Daniel. The Blackwater gang hit Pine Creek yesterday during Miss Owens's wedding. We barely got out alive. Daniel's expression darkened. The Blackwater boys again. Damn their black hearts. He turned to Genevieve, his manner softening. You're safe here, miss. Come on inside. Harriet will be glad for some female company. Harriet Turner proved to be a plump, motherly woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She took one look at Genevieve in her borrowed clothes and immediately bustled her off to a bedroom, where she produced a simple but well-made dress. This should fit you well enough, she said, holding it up against Genevieve. It belonged to our daughter, Sarah. She's married and living in Denver now with 3 little ones of her own. I couldn't possibly accept, Genevieve began, but Harriet waved away her protest. Nonsense. Sarah left it behind when she moved. It's just gathering dust here. Besides, you can't go around dressed in Fletcher's clothes, tempting as that young man might be. Genevieve felt her cheeks flush. It's not like that. Fletcher saved my life, that's all. Harriet gave her a knowing look. Well, why don't you wash up and change? There's water in the basin there and towels in the drawer. I'll have some food ready when you come down. Left alone, Genevieve gratefully washed the dust of travel from her face and hands, then changed into the offered dress. It fit reasonably well, a bit loose in the waist, but otherwise comfortable. It was a simple blue calico, nothing like the elaborate wedding gown she'd worn 2 days ago, but it made her feel human again, like a woman rather than a refugee. When she descended the stairs, she found Fletcher, Daniel, and Harriet seated at the kitchen table, deep in conversation. They fell silent when she entered, and Fletcher stood up, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her transformation. "You look," he began, then cleared his throat. "The dress suits you." "Thank you," she said, feeling suddenly shy under his intense gaze. "And thank you, Mrs. Turner, for your kindness." "Call me Harriet, dear," the older woman said, patting the empty chair beside her. "Come, sit and eat. You must be famished after your ordeal." The meal was simple but delicious: rabbit stew, fresh bread, and apple preserves. As they ate, Daniel filled them in on news from around the territory. "There's been talk of the Blackwater gang for months now," he said. "They hit a town about 50 miles east of here back in April. Took everything of value and burned half the buildings. Army's been after them, but they're like ghosts here 1 minute, gone the next." "They weren't like ghosts in Pine Creek," Fletcher said grimly. "They were very real and very dangerous. Any idea if they're still in the area?" Genevieve asked, fear tightening her chest at the thought. Daniel shook his head. "Hard to say, but you'll be safer in Silverton. Sheriff Michaels there is a good man, keeps the peace well enough." After the meal, while Harriet insisted on packing them food for the remainder of their journey, Daniel took Fletcher aside. Genevieve couldn't hear what they were discussing, but she noticed Fletcher's expression grow increasingly serious. When it was time to leave, Harriet hugged Genevieve tightly. "You take care of yourself, dear, and keep an eye on that one," she added in a whisper, nodding toward Fletcher. "He's a good man, but he carries heavy burdens. Maybe you can help lighten them a bit." Genevieve wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she simply thanked the older woman again for her kindness. Fletcher had already saddled Redemption and helped Genevieve mount, this time side saddle to accommodate her dress. As they rode away from the Turner Ranch, Genevieve said, "They seem like wonderful people." "They are," Fletcher agreed. "Daniel saved my life once, years ago. I was in a bad way, looking for trouble more than avoiding it. He set me straight, gave me work when I needed it most." "What did he tell you before we left?" Genevieve asked. "You seemed concerned." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then said, "He had news about the Blackwater gang. They were spotted heading northwest from Pine Creek toward Silverton." Genevieve felt a chill run down her spine. "They're going where we're going, it seems that way. But don't worry," he added, his voice hardening with determination. "I won't let them hurt you again, Genevieve. I promise you that." The rest of the journey passed in tense silence. Genevieve could feel Fletcher's heightened alertness, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, one hand never far from the pistol at his hip. As the sun began to set, the outlines of buildings appeared on the horizon. "Silverton," Fletcher announced. "We made it." The town was smaller than Pine Creek, but bustling with activity even as evening approached. Miners, coming off their shifts, filled the 2 saloons on the main street. A few respectable-looking businesses, a general store, a hotel, a barber shop lined the dusty thoroughfare. Fletcher guided Redemption to a modest hotel near the center of town. "Wait here," he said, dismounting. "I'll get us rooms." Genevieve waited anxiously, aware of the curious stares from passers-by. A woman traveling alone with a man who was not her husband was bound to raise eyebrows, especially in a small mining town like Silverton. Fletcher returned quickly, helping her down from the horse. "I've secured 2 rooms," he said. "And the desk clerk tells me the telegraph office opens at 8 tomorrow morning. You can send word to your family then." Genevieve nodded gratefully, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The events of the past 2 days, her ruined wedding, the dangerous journey, the constant fear came crashing down on her all at once. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Fletcher's hand immediately went to her elbow, steadying her. "Easy," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Let's get you inside." The hotel was simple but clean, with a small dining room off the lobby. Fletcher checked them in, then escorted Genevieve up a narrow staircase to a second-floor room. "This is yours," he said, unlocking the door. "Mine is just across the hall if you need anything. We can get some proper dinner once you've rested a bit." Genevieve stepped into the small room, which contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a simple wooden chair. After sleeping on the ground and in an abandoned cabin, it looked like luxury to her tired eyes. "Thank you, Fletcher," she said, turning to face him, "for everything. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't been there." Fletcher's expression softened. "Get some rest, Genevieve. I'll come check on you in a couple of hours." Left alone, Genevieve washed her face and hands in the basin provided, then lay down on the bed, not bothering to remove her borrowed dress. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to Pine Creek, to William, to her parents. Were they alive? Had they escaped the Blackwater gang's brutality? And what would she do if the worst had happened? A soft knock at her door startled her from her troubled thoughts. She sat up quickly, smoothing down her dress. "Who is it?" "It's me," Fletcher's voice came through the door. "I thought you might be hungry." Genevieve opened the door to find Fletcher standing there with a tray containing 2 plates of food and 2 cups of coffee. His hair was damp, suggesting he had washed up as well, and he had changed into a clean shirt. "May I come in?" he asked. When she hesitated, he added, "Or we can eat in the dining room downstairs if you prefer. I just thought you might want some privacy." Genevieve considered for a moment, then stepped aside to let him enter. It wasn't proper for a single woman to entertain a man in her hotel room, but then again, nothing about the past 2 days had been proper. Fletcher set the tray down on the small table by the window, pulling up the chair for her. "It's not fancy, but the cook assured me it was fresh." Beef stew and biscuits. They ate in companionable silence for a while, both too hungry to bother with conversation. Finally, when the edge had been taken off her hunger, Genevieve asked, "What happens tomorrow?" Fletcher set down his fork. "First thing, we go to the telegraph office. You send word to your family or anyone else in Pine Creek who might have information about them. Then we visit the sheriff, let him know about the Blackwater gang possibly heading this way." "And after that?" Genevieve pressed. "What happens to me?" Fletcher's blue eyes met hers. "That depends on what news we receive. If your family and William are safe, you might want to arrange transport back to Pine Creek. If not—" He hesitated. "Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." Genevieve nodded, trying to ignore the pang she felt at the thought of returning to Pine Creek, to William, to the life that had been planned out for her. It surprised her how quickly that life had come to feel distant, like something from a dream rather than her reality just 2 days ago. After they had finished eating, Fletcher gathered the dishes back onto the tray. "Try to get some real sleep," he advised. "Tomorrow might be a difficult day one way or another." As he turned to leave, Genevieve caught his arm. "Fletcher," she said softly, "I thank you. Not just for saving me, but for being kind, for treating me with respect. It means more than I can say." Fletcher's gaze softened, and for a moment, Genevieve thought he might say something more, might even reach out to touch her face. But then he simply nodded, the professional mask slipping back into place. "Good night, Genevieve," he said. "Lock your door behind me." After he left, Genevieve did as he instructed, then changed into a nightgown that had been included with the dress from Harriet. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she found her thoughts drifting not to William or Pine Creek, but to Fletcher, his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes sometimes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. It was foolish, she knew, to feel this strange attraction to a man she had known for only 2 days. A man who lived by his own code, who tracked outlaws across the territory, who clearly had no place in his life for a schoolteacher from a small town. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, it was Fletcher's face she saw, Fletcher's voice she heard in her dreams. The telegram arrived just after noon the following day. Genevieve and Fletcher had spent the morning at the telegraph office, sending messages to Pine Creek, then visiting Sheriff Michaels to warn him about the potential threat from the Blackwater gang. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran of the frontier, had thanked them for the information and promised to increase patrols around the town. They were eating lunch at a small cafe when a boy from the telegraph office burst in, waving a yellow piece of paper. "Miss Owens," he called out. "Telegram for Miss Owens." Genevieve's heart leaped into her throat as she raised her hand. The boy hurried over, handed her the telegram, and stood waiting expectantly until Fletcher pressed a coin into his palm. With trembling fingers, Genevieve unfolded the paper. Fletcher watched her face closely, ready to offer support regardless of the news. "It's from my father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're alive. My parents are alive." Her eyes continued scanning the message, and suddenly her face paled. Oh no. What is it?" Fletcher asked, leaning forward with concern. "William," she said, her voice breaking. "William is dead. He was killed during the raid trying to protect the bank, and so many others. Mrs. Miller from the dress shop, old Mr. Peterson who ran the livery, Reverend Collins who was performing our ceremony." Tears filled her eyes. "Half the town is gone, Fletcher, burned to the ground. The rest is in shambles." Fletcher reached across the table and took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "I'm so sorry, Genevieve, about William, about everything." Genevieve stared at the telegram, tears blurring her vision. William was gone. The man she had been prepared to spend her life with, to build a future with, was dead. She should feel devastated, heartbroken. But what she felt instead was a complex mix of sorrow, shock, and most confusingly, a sense of freedom that immediately filled her with guilt. "What else does it say?" Fletcher asked gently. Genevieve blinked away her tears and continued reading. "My father wants me to come home as soon as possible. They need help rebuilding. He's sending money for the stagecoach fare." She looked up at Fletcher, a new realization dawning. "You were right about the Blackwater gang. They've been tracked heading northwest away from Pine Creek. The army is in pursuit, but—" She trailed off, her expression troubled. "But what?" Fletcher prompted. "My father says they took a hostage. The banker's daughter, Elizabeth Thompson. William's sister." Genevieve's hand tightened on the telegram. "She's only 16, Fletcher. They took her when they killed William." Fletcher's expression hardened, a dangerous light entering his eyes. "When does your father expect you to return to Pine Creek?" "He doesn't say specifically." Just as soon as possible. The money for the fare should arrive tomorrow. Fletcher nodded slowly, his mind clearly working on something. Genevieve, he said after a moment, I need to go after the Blackwater gang. What? She gasped. Fletcher, that's madness. You heard what the sheriff said. There are at least 15 of them, all armed and dangerous. And the army is already in pursuit. The army won't find them, Fletcher said grimly. They don't know these territories like I do, don't know how the Blackwater boys think. And they won't be expecting someone to come at them from ahead rather than behind. What are you saying? Genevieve asked, though she was beginning to understand his plan. I'm going to ride northwest, try to cut them off before they reach the mountains. Once they get into that territory, they'll be impossible to track. His eyes met hers. I can't let them get away again, Genevieve, not after what they did to Pine Creek, to William, to you. Genevieve stared at him, torn between fear for his safety and admiration for his courage. When will you leave? As soon as possible. Today, if I can get supplies together quickly enough. He hesitated, then added softly, I was hoping. I thought I'd be escorting you back to Pine Creek. I don't like the idea of you traveling alone. I'll be fine, she assured him, though the thought of parting ways with Fletcher sent a pang through her heart. The stagecoach is safe enough, and my father's money won't arrive until tomorrow anyway. Fletcher nodded, looking relieved. Then I should get moving. The more time I waste, the further away they get with that poor girl. They left the cafe together, Fletcher striding purposefully toward the general store to gather supplies for his journey. Genevieve followed, watching as he efficiently selected what he would need: ammunition, dried foods, medical supplies. His single-minded focus reminded her of why she had trusted him from the beginning, despite the circumstances of their meeting. Fletcher Irwin was a man of purpose, of honor. As they walked back to the hotel where redemption was stabled, Genevieve made a decision. Fletcher, she said, stopping him with a hand on his arm. I want to come with you. He turned to her, surprise evident on his face. What? Genevieve, no, it's too dangerous. I know it's dangerous, she said, meeting his gaze steadily. But Elizabeth Thompson is practically my sister-in-law, or she would have been if. She swallowed hard. If things had gone differently, I can't just sit in a hotel room waiting for a stagecoach while she's in danger. I need to help. Fletcher shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. Your father is expecting you home. You've been through enough already. Pine Creek is half destroyed, Genevieve argued. One more day won't make a difference, and I won't slow you down, I promise. I can ride as well as any man. It's not about your riding ability, Fletcher said, his voice softening. It's about keeping you safe. I've already failed one woman I cared about when it came to the Blackwater gang. I won't fail another. Genevieve's breath caught at his words. One woman you cared about. Who? Fletcher's expression closed off and he started walking again, more briskly this time. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're going back to Pine Creek and I'm going after the Blackwater gang. Alone. Genevieve hurried to keep up with his long strides. Fletcher, please. Tell me what happened. He stopped abruptly, turning to face her with such intensity that she took a step back. You want to know what happened? Fine. Her name was Rebecca. We were engaged to be married. She was in Cottonwood Springs when the Blackwater gang came through. They killed her, along with my parents and younger brother. I wasn't there to protect them because I was off working a cattle drive, trying to earn extra money for our wedding. His voice was raw with old pain. I've spent 5 years tracking these men, Genevieve. 5 years living with the knowledge that if I had been there, maybe I could have saved them. So no, you're not coming with me. I won't put your life at risk too. Genevieve stared at him, her heart aching for the loss he had suffered. Suddenly, his determination to go after the gang alone made perfect sense. This wasn't just about justice, it was about redemption, about trying to make right a wrong that had defined his life for years. "I'm sorry, Fletcher," she said softly. "I didn't know." His expression softened slightly. "How could you have known? It's not something I talk about." He reached out hesitantly and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Go home, Genevieve. Build a new life. That's the best thing you can do now." As his fingers grazed her cheek, Genevieve felt a shiver run through her that had nothing to do with fear. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she didn't want to say goodbye to Fletcher Irwin, didn't want to return to Pine Creek and pretend that the past 3 days hadn't changed her irrevocably. "At least let me help you prepare," she said, making one last attempt. "I can pack food for your journey, help you organize your supplies." Fletcher studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right, but only that. And then you promise me you'll take the stagecoach back to Pine Creek tomorrow." "I promise," Genevieve said, crossing her fingers behind her back like a child. She had no intention of letting Fletcher ride off alone into danger, but he didn't need to know that. Not yet. They spent the remainder of the afternoon preparing for Fletcher's departure. Genevieve insisted on purchasing extra supplies with what little money she had, packing food carefully to make it last as long as possible. Fletcher acquired a detailed map of the territory from the sheriff, who wished him luck, but warned him not to take the law into his own hands. "I'm not looking for revenge," Fletcher assured the lawman. "Just want to help bring in these outlaws and rescue the girl they took." As evening approached, Fletcher announced he would leave at first light. "No sense starting out in the dark," he said as they ate dinner in the hotel dining room. "I'll make better time if I wait until morning." Genevieve nodded, her mind racing with plans of her own. She had already spoken to the stable boy, slipping him extra coins to prepare a horse for her before dawn. She had also purchased men's clothing, again practical trousers, a sturdy shirt, and a hat that would hide her distinctive red hair. If Fletcher wouldn't take her willingly, she would simply follow him. "I'll miss you," she said honestly as they stood outside her hotel room door that night. "These past few days, they've been terrifying, yes, but also, I don't know, I feel like I've really lived for the first time." Fletcher's gaze softened as he looked down at her. "You're an extraordinary woman, Genevieve Owens. Pine Creek is lucky to have you back. And what about you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Will I ever see you again?" Fletcher hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek gently. "I'd like that," he said. "Maybe when this is all over, when the Blackwater gang is brought to justice, I could pass through Pine Creek. See how the rebuilding is going." Genevieve leaned slightly into his touch, her heart racing. "I'd like that too." For a moment they stood there, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Fletcher stepped back, clearing his throat. "You should get some rest. Morning will come early." "Good night, Fletcher," Genevieve said, reluctantly opening her door. "Good night, Genevieve," he replied, and she could have sworn there was regret in his voice, as if he too wished their time together wasn't coming to an end. Once inside her room, Genevieve moved quickly. She changed into the men's clothing she had purchased, binding her breasts with strips of cloth to further disguise her figure. She tucked her hair up under the hat, checking her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The transformation was remarkable at a distance, or in poor light, she could easily pass for a young man. She didn't sleep that night, too anxious about her plan. Just before dawn, she slipped out of her room, carrying the small bag she had packed with essentials. The hotel was quiet, the desk clerk dozing in his chair. Outside, the streets of Silverton were empty save for a few early risers miners heading to their shifts, a baker opening his shop. At the livery stable, the boy she had bribed was waiting with a saddled horse, a sturdy mare with a gentle disposition. "She's not the fastest, but she's sure-footed and won't give you no trouble," he assured Genevieve, who had told him she was a young man needing to leave town discreetly. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing a final coin into his palm. "Remember, not a word to anyone." The boy nodded, pocketing the money with a grin. "Ain't seen nobody leave this morning, mister. Not a soul." Genevieve mounted the mare and rode quietly out of town, heading northwest along the main trail. She found a concealed spot about a mile out of Silverton, where she could watch the trail without being seen. Now all she had to do was wait for Fletcher. She didn't have to wait long. As the first rays of sunlight began to paint the eastern sky, she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Peering cautiously from her hiding place, she saw Fletcher riding Redemption at a steady pace, his expression determined, his rifle visible in its scabbard beside the saddle. Genevieve waited until he had passed, then began to follow at a discreet distance. She had no illusions about her skills as a tracker, but she knew Fletcher would be focused on catching up to the Blackwater gang, not on watching his back trail. As long as she kept him in sight without getting too close, he would lead her right to them. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as the day wore on. Fletcher maintained a steady pace, stopping occasionally to check the map or scan the horizon with a small spyglass. Genevieve followed carefully, grateful for the sturdy mare beneath her and the extra canteen of water she had thought to bring. By midday, the sun was beating down mercilessly, and Genevieve was beginning to regret her impulsive decision. Her body ached from hours in the saddle, and the men's clothing, while practical, was uncomfortable in the heat. But the thought of turning back never crossed her mind. Elizabeth Thompson needed help, and for reasons she wasn't quite ready to examine, Genevieve needed to be with Fletcher. Late in the afternoon, Fletcher suddenly veered off the main trail, heading toward a stand of trees near a small creek. Genevieve waited until he had disappeared among the trees, then cautiously approached. She dismounted a good distance away, tying her mare to a bush and proceeding on foot. As she drew closer, she could hear Fletcher moving about, presumably setting up camp for the night. She crept forward, trying to decide the best way to reveal herself. Should she simply walk into his camp, or wait until morning and pretend she had just caught up with him? The decision was made for her when a strong arm suddenly wrapped around her waist from behind, and the cold barrel of a pistol pressed against her temple. "Make one move, and it'll be your last," Fletcher's voice growled in her ear. Then, as he spun her around to face him, his eyes widened in shock. "Genevieve," she offered a weak smile. "Surprise." Fletcher's face darkened with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing? I told you to stay in Silverton." "I couldn't let you go alone," she said, standing her ground despite the fury in his eyes. "Elizabeth needs help, and so do you." "I don't need your help," he snapped, holstering his pistol with more force than necessary. "What I need is for you to be safe, back in town, heading home to your family." "My family would want me to help save an innocent girl," Genevieve argued, "and I'm not turning back now. I've come this far already." Fletcher ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? The Blackwater gang won't hesitate to kill you or worse if they catch you." "They won't catch me," Genevieve said with more confidence than she felt. "Not with you protecting me." Fletcher stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head in disbelief. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met, Genevieve Owens." "Thank you," she replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Does that mean I can stay?" Fletcher sighed deeply. "It seems I don't have much choice in the matter. You're already here, and I can't very well send you back alone now." His expression softened slightly. "But you have to promise to do exactly as I say without question. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. Understood. Genevieve nodded solemnly. Understood. And take that ridiculous hat off, he added, a reluctant smile finally breaking through his anger. You look like a boy playing dress-up. Genevieve removed the hat, letting her long auburn hair fall free. Better. Fletcher's eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, his expression shifting to something more complicated than simple anger or amusement. Yes, he said finally, his voice lower than before. Much better. As night fell, they sat together by a small, carefully shielded fire. Fletcher had shared his provisions with her, though not without further grumbling about her recklessness. Now, as they sipped coffee from tin cups, a more companionable silence had fallen between them. "How did you know I was following you?" Genevieve asked finally, Fletcher's lips quirked upward. "You're not exactly a skilled tracker, Genevieve. I heard your horse about an hour after I left Silverton." "And you let me follow you all day?" she asked, indignant. He shrugged. "I figured you'd either get tired and turn back, or I'd confront you when we made camp. Didn't see the point in turning around and wasting time arguing with you in the middle of the trail." Genevieve had to admit the logic of his decision. "So what's the plan now? How do we find the Blackwater gang?" "We don't find them," Fletcher said, his expression turning serious. "I find them. You stay hidden, well away from danger." "That wasn't our agreement," Genevieve protested. "Actually, it was. You promised to do exactly as I say, and I say you stay safe." Fletcher's tone left no room for argument. "I'm tracking them to a place called Devil's Canyon. It's a narrow pass through the mountains, the most likely route they'll take if they're heading for the border. We should reach it by tomorrow afternoon." "And then what?" Genevieve asked. Fletcher's eyes hardened. "And then I do whatever is necessary to rescue Elizabeth Thompson and bring the Blackwater gang to justice." Genevieve studied his face in the flickering firelight. "You're not planning to take on 15 armed men by yourself, are you?" "I have a plan," Fletcher assured her. "And it doesn't involve a frontal assault. I'm not suicidal, Genevieve." She wasn't entirely convinced, but decided not to press the issue for now. "Tell me about Rebecca," she said instead, her voice softening. "If you want to, that is." Fletcher was quiet for so long that Genevieve thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring into the fire, he said, "She was a schoolteacher like you, loved children, loved books, had the sweetest laugh you ever heard." A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. "We grew up together in Cottonwood Springs. I always knew I'd marry her someday from the time we were kids." "She sounds wonderful," Genevieve said gently. "She was," Fletcher agreed. "The best person I've ever known. She didn't deserve what happened to her." "Neither did you," Genevieve said, reaching out impulsively to touch his hand. "It wasn't your fault, Fletcher." He didn't pull away from her touch. "My head knows that," he said quietly. "My heart's a different matter." They sat in silence for a while, Genevieve's hand still resting on his. Finally, Fletcher cleared his throat and stood up. "We should get some rest. Long day tomorrow." Genevieve nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. "Thank you for telling me about her." Fletcher looked down at her, his expression softening in the firelight. "Thank you for listening. It's been a long time since I talked about Rebecca to anyone." That night, as Genevieve lay wrapped in a blanket near the fire, she found herself thinking about the woman Fletcher had loved and lost. Rebecca, the schoolteacher with the sweet laugh. It was clear that Fletcher had loved her deeply, that her death had shaped the man he had become. Genevieve wondered if anyone would ever love her that way, with such devotion that it transcended even death. And as she drifted toward sleep, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone already did. The next day dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for traveling. Fletcher was already up when Genevieve awoke, packing their few supplies onto the horses. He handed her a cup of coffee and a piece of hardtack without comment, his expression focused and distant. "How far to Devil's Canyon?" Genevieve asked, trying to break the silence that had fallen between them. "If we push hard, we can be there by early afternoon," Fletcher replied, checking Redemption's saddle. "The Blackwater gang should reach it by evening if they're taking the route I think they are." "And you're sure they're heading for the border?" Genevieve asked, swinging herself up into her mare's saddle. Fletcher mounted Redemption with easy grace. "It's what I would do in their position. They've hit too many towns, made too many enemies. Mexico is their best option now." They rode northwest, the terrain growing increasingly mountainous. Fletcher set a grueling pace, and Genevieve found herself struggling to keep up at times, though she refused to complain. By midday, they had reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Fletcher dismounted, gesturing for Genevieve to do the same. "We'll leave the horses here," he said. "The approach to the canyon is too exposed for riding." They secured the horses in a small grove of trees with access to water, then continued on foot. Fletcher moved with quiet confidence, occasionally stopping to study the ground or peer ahead with his spyglass. Genevieve followed, trying to mimic his careful footsteps. Finally, they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow passage between two towering cliffs. "Devil's Canyon," Fletcher said softly. "The only pass through these mountains for 20 miles in either direction. If they're headed for the border, they'll come through here." Genevieve surveyed the scene below. The canyon was indeed a formidable natural feature, its walls rising almost vertically on either side of a narrow trail that wound its way between them. "It's the perfect place for an ambush," she observed. Fletcher nodded grimly. "Exactly what I was thinking. Which is why you're going to stay right here, out of sight, while I position myself down there." He pointed to a cluster of boulders near the canyon entrance. But Genevieve began to protest. "No arguments," Fletcher cut her off. "This is where I need you to keep your promise. Stay here, keep your head down, and don't make a sound, no matter what happens. If things go badly, get back to the horses and ride for Silverton. Find Sheriff Michaels and tell him everything." Genevieve wanted to argue further, but the determination in Fletcher's eyes told her it would be pointless. "Be careful," she said instead. "Please." Fletcher's expression softened slightly. "I will." He hesitated, then added, "Genevieve, if I don't make it back, don't," she interrupted, her voice catching. "Don't say it. You'll come back." Fletcher looked at her for a long moment, then, in a move that surprised them both, he leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief but tender, filled with unspoken emotions. "For luck," he murmured as he pulled away, his eyes searching hers. Genevieve's heart was racing, her lips tingling from the unexpected kiss. "Fletcher," she whispered. But he was already turning away, checking his weapons one last time before beginning his descent toward the canyon floor. She watched him go, fear, and something more complex twisting in her stomach. The kiss had changed everything, confirming what she had begun to suspect, that Fletcher's feelings for her went beyond mere protective instinct. And her own reaction, the way her heart had leaped at his touch, told her that she felt the same. Hours passed as Genevieve kept watch from her hidden position. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the canyon. Fletcher was well concealed among the boulders below, so still that at times she lost sight of him entirely. Just as the light was beginning to fade, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. Her heart began to pound as she peered cautiously over the ridge. A group of riders was approaching the canyon entrance, perhaps 15 men, dusty and hard-looking. And there, in the middle of the group, a smaller figure on horseback, a young woman with long blonde hair, her hands apparently bound to her saddle horn. Elizabeth Thompson. She was alive, at least, though from this distance, Genevieve couldn't tell what condition she was in. The Blackwater gang had reached Devil's Canyon right on schedule, just as Fletcher had predicted. Genevieve held her breath as the gang entered the narrow pass, watching for any sign of movement from Fletcher's hiding place. What exactly was his plan? He couldn't possibly take on all these men alone, no matter how good he was with a gun. The answer came moments later, when a deafening explosion rocked the canyon. Rocks and debris rained down from one side of the cliff face, partially blocking the trail behind the last of the gang members. The outlaws reacted with confusion, guns drawn, looking wildly around for the source of the explosion. Fletcher chose that moment to make his move, rising from his hiding place with his rifle aimed at the apparent leader of the gang, a tall man with a black beard riding at the front of the group. "That's far enough, Jackson," Fletcher called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Let the girl go, and maybe some of you will leave this canyon alive." The bearded man, Jackson, laughed, a harsh, grating sound that carried clearly to where Genevieve crouched. Well, if it ain't Fletcher Irwin. Still nursing that grudge from Cottonwood Springs, are you, boy? "This ends today, Jackson," Fletcher replied, his rifle steady. 5 years is long enough." Jackson's expression hardened. "You always were a fool, Irwin, 1 man against 15. Those are poor odds, even for you." "Who said I was alone?" Fletcher countered, and Genevieve realized this must be part of his plan to make the gang believe he had backup. Jackson's eyes narrowed as he scanned the canyon walls. "Nice try, but I don't see no posse, just 1 man with a death wish." "Last chance, Jackson," Fletcher warned. "Let Elizabeth Thompson go." Instead of responding, Jackson suddenly wheeled his horse around, using Elizabeth's body as a shield. "You want her? Come and get her," he shouted, spurring his horse forward, deeper into the canyon. Chaos erupted as the other gang members opened fire on Fletcher's position. Genevieve watched in horror as Fletcher dove for cover, returning fire when he could. 2 of the outlaws fell from their horses, but the others were pressing their advantage, moving to surround the boulders where Fletcher had taken refuge. Without thinking about the danger, without remembering her promise to stay hidden, Genevieve grabbed the pistol Fletcher had insisted she carry and scrambled down the side of the ridge. She couldn't just watch him die. Fletcher was pinned down, outnumbered and outgunned. But he had one advantage: the gang didn't know about Genevieve's position above them. As she reached a ledge overlooking the firefight, she took careful aim at one of the outlaws who was creeping toward Fletcher's position from behind. Her hands were shaking, and she had never fired a gun at a person before. But Fletcher's life was at stake. She took a deep breath, steadied her aim, and pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed through the canyon, and the outlaw fell, clutching his shoulder. The unexpected attack from a new direction caused confusion among the gang members, giving Fletcher the opportunity he needed to change positions. "Genevieve," he shouted, spotting her on the ledge. "Get back!" But it was too late. One of the outlaws had seen her too, and was now taking aim in her direction. Fletcher fired rapidly, forcing the man to duck for cover, but the damage was done. Genevieve's presence was now known to the entire gang. "2 of you keep them busy," Jackson shouted from further up the canyon. "The rest of you with me. We're getting out of here." 4 of the outlaws remained behind, continuing to exchange fire with Fletcher, while the rest, including Jackson with Elizabeth still his prisoner, pressed deeper into the canyon. Fletcher caught Genevieve's eye across the distance and pointed urgently toward the far end of the canyon. She understood immediately. Jackson was escaping with Elizabeth. Someone needed to follow them, to stop them from reaching the other side of the pass. With a quick nod to Fletcher, Genevieve began to make her way along the ridge, using the rocks as cover as she moved parallel to the fleeing gang members below. She could hear Fletcher's gun still firing behind her, keeping the remaining outlaws occupied. The light was fading fast now, making it difficult to keep track of Jackson and his men. But Genevieve pressed on, driven by determination and a growing anger at these men who had caused so much pain to Pine Creek, to Elizabeth, to Fletcher. Finally, she reached a point where the canyon widened slightly before its exit on the far side. Jackson and his men had stopped, apparently regrouping before making their final push to freedom. Elizabeth was still with them, slumped in her saddle, her blonde hair hiding her face. Genevieve crept closer, trying to find a vantage point from which she might be able to help. She had no plan, no real idea of what she could do against so many armed men. But she couldn't let them take Elizabeth across the border. As she moved, a loose rock dislodged beneath her foot, clattering down the canyon wall. Jackson's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the growing darkness above. "Who's there?" he called out. When there was no answer, he grabbed Elizabeth roughly by the arm. "Come out, or the girl dies right now." Genevieve froze, her heart pounding. She couldn't reveal herself, she'd be killed instantly, and Elizabeth along with her. But what other choice did she have? The decision was taken out of her hands when a single shot rang out, the bullet striking the ground at Jackson's feet. All heads turned toward the source of the shot, at the narrow part of the canyon they had just traveled through. Fletcher stood there, rifle raised, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead but very much alive. "Let her go, Jackson," he called out. "It's me you want." Jackson sneered. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, Irwin?" "Not when it comes to stopping men like you," Fletcher replied, taking a step forward. "The others are dead or fled. It's just you and your few remaining men now, and the army patrol that's right behind me." It was a bluff, Genevieve knew, but a good one. The outlaws glanced nervously at each other, clearly wondering if Fletcher was telling the truth. "You're lying," Jackson said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Am I?" Fletcher challenged. "Why don't you wait around and find out? Or you could let the girl go and maybe make it across the border before they get here." Jackson hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Then, with a sudden motion, he shoved Elizabeth from her horse. She fell hard to the ground, a cry of pain escaping her lips. "You want her, take her." Jackson snarled. "But this isn't over, Irwin, not by a long shot." He wheeled his horse around, shouting to his men, "Ride! For the border!" The remaining outlaws spurred their horses forward, galloping toward the canyon exit. Fletcher rushed to Elizabeth's side, kneeling beside her fallen form. Genevieve scrambled down from her position, half sliding, half climbing down the rocky slope. By the time she reached the canyon floor, Fletcher had helped Elizabeth to a sitting position and was checking her for injuries. "Elizabeth," Genevieve called, hurrying toward them. "Elizabeth, it's me, Genevieve Owens, from Pine Creek." The young woman looked up, her face bruised but her eyes alert. "Miss Owens, what are you doing here? We came to find you," Genevieve explained, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt badly?" Elizabeth shook her head slowly. "Just bruises, I think, and my ankle, when he pushed me off the horse." Fletcher was already examining her ankle, his touch gentle despite the urgency of their situation. "It's not broken," he pronounced. "Badly sprained, though. She won't be able to walk far." "What about the men you were fighting?" Genevieve asked Fletcher. "You said they were dead or fled." Fletcher nodded grimly. "Two dead, two wounded badly enough that they won't be following us. The rest went with Jackson." He glanced toward the canyon exit. "We need to move." Jackson might decide to come back with reinforcements once he realizes there's no army patrol. "Can you carry her?" Genevieve asked, looking at Elizabeth's pale face. Fletcher considered, then nodded. "Back to the horses, yes. Then we'll need to figure out how to get her on one." He lifted Elizabeth carefully, cradling her against his chest. The young woman was clearly exhausted, her head lolling against Fletcher's shoulder as he began to make his way back through the canyon. Genevieve followed, keeping watch behind them, the pistol still clutched in her hand. The journey back through the canyon seemed to take forever, each shadow appearing ominous in the growing darkness. But they encountered no further resistance and eventually reached the place where they had left their horses. Fletcher gently set Elizabeth down, leaning her against a tree. "We need to bind that ankle before we move her further," he said to Genevieve. Working together, they used strips torn from Genevieve's petticoat to create a makeshift bandage for Elizabeth's injured ankle. The young woman winced in pain but didn't complain. "Thank you," she said softly, looking from Fletcher to Genevieve. "Both of you, I thought no one was coming for me." "We couldn't leave you with those men," Genevieve assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "How did you manage to survive these past days with them?" Elizabeth's eyes darkened with memories she clearly wished she could forget. "Jackson. He kept the others away from me, said I was valuable, that they could get a ransom for me." She shuddered. "But I heard them talking. Once we crossed the border, he was going to sell me to a man he knows in Mexico." Fletcher's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with renewed anger. "He'll pay for that along with everything else. The army will catch him, Elizabeth. He won't get away with what he's done." "What about William?" Elizabeth asked, her voice breaking. Is he really gone?" Genevieve nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Elizabeth. He died trying to protect the bank, to protect you." Elizabeth began to sob, the full weight of her ordeal and her brother's death finally overwhelming her. Genevieve held her, murmuring soothing words while Fletcher stood watch, his expression grim. When Elizabeth's sobs had subsided, Fletcher said gently, "We need to get moving. It's not safe to stay here." Together, they managed to get Elizabeth mounted on Genevieve's mare, with Genevieve riding behind her to keep her secure. Fletcher led them away from Devil's Canyon, taking a different route than the one they had used to approach it. "Where are we going?" Genevieve asked as they rode through the darkness, the moon providing just enough light to see the trail. "There's an army outpost about 10 miles from here," Fletcher replied. "We'll head there. They can provide medical attention for Elizabeth, and they'll want to know about Jackson and his men heading for the border." They rode through the night, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and to check on Elizabeth, who drifted in and out of sleep, exhausted from her ordeal. Genevieve held her securely, her own body aching with fatigue but her mind alert with the lingering fear of pursuit. Fletcher rode slightly ahead, constantly scanning their surroundings for danger. He had been wounded in the fight, not just the cut on his forehead, but a bullet grazed along his upper arm that he had hastily bandaged. Yet he showed no sign of slowing, his determination to get Elizabeth to safety driving him forward. As dawn broke, they saw the outpost in the distance, a small collection of buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade. Fletcher fired 3 shots into the air, the signal for approaching friendlies, and they were met at the gates by alert soldiers with rifles at the ready. "My name is Fletcher Irwin," Fletcher called out as they approached. "We have an injured woman here, kidnapped by the Blackwater gang. We need help." The gates swung open, and they were quickly surrounded by soldiers, some helping Elizabeth down from the horse, others taking the reins of the tired animals. An officer approached, his expression serious. "Lieutenant Michaels," he introduced himself. "We've been hunting the Blackwater gang for weeks. Where did you encounter them?" "Devil's Canyon," Fletcher replied, dismounting stiffly. "They were heading for the border, about 10 of them, led by a man named Jackson." The lieutenant nodded sharply. "We'll send a patrol immediately. In the meantime, our doctor will see to the young lady and to your injuries as well." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Elizabeth was taken to the infirmary, where the army doctor confirmed that her ankle was indeed badly sprained but not broken. She also had numerous bruises and was suffering from exhaustion and malnutrition, but would recover fully with rest and care. Fletcher's wounds were cleaned and properly bandaged, the doctor commenting that he was lucky the bullet had only grazed his arm. Genevieve, though physically unharmed, was given a cot in the officers' quarters to rest, the strain of the past days finally catching up with her. She awoke to find Fletcher sitting beside her cot, his face clean-shaven for the first time since she had met him, his wounds neatly bandaged. He smiled when he saw she was awake. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked, sitting up slowly. "About 6 hours," he replied. "You needed it. How are you feeling?" "Better," she admitted. "How is Elizabeth?" "Resting comfortably. The doctor says she'll be fine with time." Fletcher's expression grew more serious. Lieutenant Michaels sent a patrol to Devil's Canyon at first light. They found the bodies of the outlaws we left behind, but no sign of Jackson or the others. They're continuing the pursuit toward the border. Genevieve nodded, not surprised that Jackson had escaped. Men like him seemed to have a knack for slipping away just when justice was closing in. "So what happens now?" "The lieutenant has arranged for a military escort to take Elizabeth back to Pine Creek as soon as she's strong enough to travel. A day or two at most." He hesitated, then added, "He's offered to include us in that escort if we wish to return to Pine Creek as well." Genevieve studied Fletcher's face, trying to read his thoughts. "Is that what you want to do? Return to Pine Creek?" Fletcher's blue eyes met hers, something vulnerable in their depths. "I want to be wherever you are, Genevieve." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. "What about the Blackwater gang, your quest for justice?" "I've been chasing them for 5 years," Fletcher said softly. "And in all that time, I never found anything to fill the emptiness inside me, until I met you." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "I can't bring Rebecca back. I can't change what happened in Cottonwood Springs, but I can choose what happens next, and I choose you if you'll have me." Genevieve felt tears welling in her eyes. "Are you sure, Fletcher? Pine Creek is a small town, very different from the life you've been living." "I'm sure," he said firmly. "The army will catch Jackson eventually, and Pine Creek will need rebuilding. I'm good with my hands. I could help with that. Start a ranch nearby, maybe, if that's something you might want to." Genevieve's mind filled with an image of a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine: a home with Fletcher, a life built together. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I'd like that," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Very much." Fletcher's face broke into a smile that transformed his rugged features, making him look younger, unburdened. He leaned forward, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek as he kissed her, not a brief touch like before, but a real kiss, full of promise and longing. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find love again," he murmured. "Especially not with a stubborn, reckless bride who followed me into danger against all reason." Genevieve laughed softly. "And I never expected to fall in love with a man who lifted me onto his horse in the middle of a raid and rode off with me like something from a dime novel." "When you put it that way, it sounds rather romantic," Fletcher teased, pressing another quick kiss to her lips. "It was," Genevieve admitted. "Even in the midst of all that terror, there was something, I don't know, fated about it. As if everything in my life had been leading to that moment to you." Fletcher's expression sobered slightly. "I feel the same way, like all the pain, all the searching was meant to bring me to you." He took a deep breath. "I know it's soon, and I know we have a lot to learn about each other still. But I've spent 5 years of my life chasing ghosts, Genevieve. I don't want to waste another minute. When we get back to Pine Creek, will you marry me?" Genevieve stared at him, stunned by the suddenness of the proposal. But as she looked into his eyes, she knew with absolute certainty that this was right. Fletcher Irwin was the man she was meant to love, the man who would love her with the kind of passion she had always secretly longed for. "Yes," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, I will marry you, Fletcher." 2 weeks later, Genevieve stood on the newly rebuilt porch of her parents' home in Pine Creek, watching as Fletcher worked alongside other men from the town to repair the damaged roof of the general store across the street. The town was slowly coming back to life after the Blackwater raid, buildings being reconstructed, businesses reopening. Elizabeth Thompson had returned to her father's home, still grieving for William but recovering well from her physical injuries. The emotional scars would take longer to heal, but she was surrounded by people who cared for her, who would help her through the difficult days ahead. The news from the frontier was promising the army had caught up with Jackson and the remnants of the Blackwater gang just shy of the Mexican border. There had been a fierce gun battle and Jackson had been killed, a fitting end for a man who had caused so much suffering. "Penny, for your thoughts?" her mother asked, joining her on the porch with 2 glasses of lemonade. Genevieve smiled, accepting one of the glasses. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time." Her mother followed her gaze to where Fletcher was working, his shirt off in the summer heat, revealing his muscular back and arms. "He's a good man, your Fletcher," she commented. "Different from William, of course, but good in his own way." "Yes, he is," Genevieve agreed, her heart warming at the sight of her fiancé. They had told her parents of their engagement upon returning to Pine Creek, and after the initial shock, they had given their blessing. Fletcher had proven himself to them with his tireless work helping to rebuild the town, and with the obvious depth of his feelings for their daughter. "Your father and I were talking last night," her mother said, sipping her lemonade. "About the wedding." Genevieve turned to look at her, curious. "What about it?" "Well, we know you want something simple this time, after what happened. We understand that. But we were thinking maybe you could still wear my wedding dress. It escaped the raid unharmed. I had it packed away in that cedar chest in the attic." Tears pricked at Genevieve's eyes. "I'd like that, Mama. I'd like that very much." Her mother smiled, patting her hand. "Good. And maybe we could have the ceremony at the Thompson place by that pretty pond." Elizabeth suggested it, said William would have wanted it that way. Genevieve nodded, touched by Elizabeth's generosity of spirit. "That sounds perfect." Across the street, Fletcher looked up from his work, catching Genevieve's eye. He grinned and waved, then returned to hammering shingles into place. The easy way he had integrated himself into the life of Pine Creek still amazed her. This man who had spent years as a solitary hunter of outlaws, now building a future in a small frontier town. That evening, after supper with her parents, Fletcher and Genevieve walked to the edge of town, to a small hilltop that offered a view of the surrounding countryside. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a beautiful end to a productive day. "I've been thinking," Fletcher said as they stood hand in hand, watching the sun sink below the horizon, "about our future." "Oh," Genevieve prompted, leaning against his side. "Daniel Turner offered me a parcel of land adjoining his ranch. Said it was too much for him to manage at his age, but good grazing land. It's about 5 miles from town, close enough that you could still teach at the school if you wanted to." Genevieve looked up at him, surprised. "You've been planning our future that specifically?" Fletcher smiled down at her. "I told you I don't want to waste any more time, and I've saved most of the money I earned over the years. It's enough to build a good house, buy some cattle to start a herd." "A rancher's wife," Genevieve mused, trying the idea on for size. "I never imagined that for myself." "Would it make you happy?" Fletcher asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Genevieve considered the question seriously. The life Fletcher was describing would be different from anything she had known, harder in some ways, with more physical labor and fewer of the town amenities she was used to. But it would also be a life filled with purpose, with open spaces, with the freedom to build something together. Yes, she said finally with absolute conviction. It would make me very happy, Fletcher, as long as I'm with you. Relief and joy spread across his face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the last light of day faded from the sky. Then that's what we'll do. We'll build a life together, a home, maybe even a family someday. Genevieve rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I'd like that. Children, I mean, I've always wanted them. How many were you thinking? Fletcher asked, a smile in his voice. At least 3, she replied without hesitation. Maybe more. Fletcher laughed softly, the sound rumbling through his chest. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Owens. But I accept your terms. They stood there together as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, making plans for their future, dreaming of the life they would build together. It was not the future Genevieve had envisioned for herself just 3 weeks ago, when she had donned her wedding dress to marry William Thompson. It was something wilder, less predictable, potentially more difficult. But as Fletcher's arms tightened around her, as his lips found hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of passion and partnership, Genevieve knew without a doubt that it was the future she was meant to have. The one she had always, in her heart of hearts, hoped for. 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Genevieve stood once again in a wedding dress, her mother's gown, lovingly altered to fit her beside a flower-decked archway at the edge of the Thompson pond. But this time, when she looked down the aisle formed by rows of chairs filled with the people of Pine Creek, it was Fletcher waiting for her, his blue eyes shining with love. As her father walked her down the aisle, Genevieve's mind flashed back to that terrifying day when the Blackwater gang had attacked Pine Creek, when she had hidden behind the church, certain that her life was over. Instead, it had been just beginning. Fletcher took her hands in his as she reached him, his strong fingers warm and steady around hers. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, his voice full of wonder. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other through all the adventures and challenges that life might bring their way. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Fletcher bent to kiss her, Genevieve felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The celebration afterward was joyous, the people of Pine Creek coming together to eat, drink, and dance in honor of the new couple. Elizabeth Thompson, still using a cane for her healing ankle but looking more like her old self each day, embraced Genevieve tightly. "William would be happy for you," she said. "He would want you to have this kind of love." Genevieve hugged her back, grateful for her understanding. "Thank you, Elizabeth. That means more than I can say." As the sun began to set, Fletcher found Genevieve amid the celebration and took her hand. "Ready to go, Mrs. Irwin?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. They had built a small cabin on their new land, nothing fancy yet, but cozy and private, the perfect place to begin their life together. They would expand it over time, add rooms for the children they hoped to have, make it into the home of their dreams. "I'm ready," Genevieve said, smiling up at her new husband. They said their goodbyes amid cheers and well wishes, then mounted their horses, Fletcher on Redemption, Genevieve on the mare she had purchased for their journey, now named Hope. As they prepared to ride away, Fletcher suddenly dismounted, coming to stand beside Genevieve's horse. "What is it?" she asked, puzzled. Fletcher grinned up at her, his eyes dancing with mischief. "I was thinking about the first time we met," he said. how it all began. With a swift, graceful movement, he lifted Genevieve from her saddle, cradling her in his arms for a moment as the wedding guests laughed and applauded. Then, with a wink, he set her gently onto Redemption's back, mounting behind her just as he had that fateful day. "Now we can leave," he said, his arms encircling her waist as he took the reins, Hope following on a lead rope behind them. As they rode away toward their new home, toward their future together, Genevieve leaned back against Fletcher's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. What had begun in terror and chaos had transformed into something beautiful, a love story neither of them had expected, but one that felt as inevitable as the rising sun. "I love you, Fletcher Irwin," she said, turning her head to look back at him. Fletcher's arms tightened around her, his lips brushing her temple. "And I love you, Genevieve Irwin, now and always." They rode on into the gathering dusk, leaving Pine Creek behind but carrying with them the memories of how they had found each other amid the storm. Two hearts, once broken, now healing together. Two lives, once separate, now intertwined for all the days to come. As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Genevieve made a silent wish not for wealth or ease or comfort, but for a lifetime of adventures with the man who had lifted her onto his horse and into a future brighter than she had ever dared to dream.